We have all seen the Viking before. We have seen him emerge from fog, his ship slicing the water. We have seen fire on the coastline, heard the clash of steel, watched monks flee and kings panic. Films, television series, video games, even manga have repeated this image so often that it feels ancient, almost inherited. But this image did not come from entertainment. It came from fear. Because long before the Viking became a character in our stories, I was a disruption in the lives of real people. A disruption so severe that an entire era of European history would later be named after him. So in this story, we are not asking whether the Vikings were heroes or villains. We are asking a more dangerous question. Why did the world around them break? And why did it never truly return to what it was before? Introduction. Who were the Vikings? When we talk about the Viking Age, the first thing we must do is slow down. Not every person from Northern Europe was a Viking, and not every Viking was a warrior. When we say Viking, we are talking about explorers, traders, raiders, and settlers who came primarily from Scandinavia, what we now call Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. They belonged to the wider Norse world, but being Norse did not automatically make someone a Viking. Most people never left home. They farmed, they fished, they endured. To go Viking was a choice. The word itself appears in 9th century Anglo-Saxon poetry and on runestones carved across Scandinavia. Its exact origin remains debated. To the Franks, these people were known as Normans, Northmen. To Arab writers, they were Magus, strangers from the cold edges of the known world. Different names, same unease, and yet, when we look closer, the familiar image of the Viking as a savage barbarian begins to collapse. Viking society was organized, hierarchical, and deeply practical. They were farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and above all, master sailors. Violence was not who they were. It was what they used. The driving forces behind expansion. So what pushed them onto the sea? The first answer we encounter is population. By the early Middle Ages, Scandinavian communities were growing faster than their land could support. Arable soil was limited. Inheritance laws favored the eldest son. Younger sons were left with few options and even fewer guarantees. Hunger did not arrive as catastrophe. It arrived quietly. The second force was economic. As Europe slowly recovered from the collapse of the Roman world, trade revived. Coastal towns and monasteries accumulated wealth, but they lacked protection. From the deck of a ship, these places did not look holy. They looked exposed. The third force was belief. Norse religion did not glorify peaceful death. To die bravely in battle was to be chosen by the gods, welcomed into Valhalla. This belief did not make Vikings reckless, but it made fear a weaker weapon against them. And finally, there was environment. Shipbuilding technology advanced. The longship became faster, lighter, more reliable. At the same time, a relatively stable climate made long-distance travel less dangerous. For many, staying home began to feel riskier than leaving. Viking society and warfare. When we look inside Viking society, we do not see chaos. We see structure. At the bottom were the thralls, enslaved people captured in raids or born into bondage. Above them were the carls, free men and women, farmers, craftsmen, sailors. They formed the backbone of society and the bulk of Viking armies. At the top were the jarls, nobles who controlled land, ships, and political power. They organized expeditions and claimed the greatest rewards. Women in Viking society held more legal rights than many of their contemporaries elsewhere in Europe. This did not make the society equal, but it made it adaptable. Militarily, Vikings favored efficiency over spectacle. Axes, spears, swords, and round shields were practical, affordable, and effective. Heavy armor existed, but speed mattered more. And then there was the longship. This was the true engine of the Viking Age. With its shallow draft, it could cross open seas and slip deep inland through rivers. Under favorable conditions, a fleet could travel nearly 300 kilometers in a single day. European defenses faced land. The Vikings came from water. The age of raiding and conquest. In the year 793, Viking raiders attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne. When we read about this event today, it often feels symbolic. To those who lived through it, it was a warning. Raids increased in scale and ambition. What began as seasonal attacks evolved into sustained campaigns. By the mid-9th century, Viking forces no longer returned home after summer. They stayed. In 865, a massive coalition known as the Great Heathen Army landed in England. Later sources associate it with the sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, including Ivar the Boneless. Whether Ragnar himself truly existed remains uncertain. What matters is that his legend mobilized real men and real armies. One by one, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms collapsed. At the same time, Viking expansion reached far beyond the British Isles. To the east, Norse traders and warriors, often called Varangians, traveled along river networks into Eastern Europe. They linked Scandinavia to Byzantium and the Islamic world, helping lay the foundations of Kievan Rus. To the west, Vikings settled in what would become Normandy. In 911, the leader Rollo accepted land in exchange for loyalty, converting to Christianity and becoming the first Duke of Normandy. To the south, Viking fleets struck parts of Spain and Italy. And around the year 1000, Norse explorers reached North America. This was not a single empire. It was a moving system. Its height came under Canute the Great. By the early 11th century, Canute ruled England, Denmark, Norway, and parts of Sweden. He governed not only through conquest, but through law and compromise. This was the Viking Age at its peak. The end of the Viking Age. In 1066, the English throne was empty. 3 men claimed it: Harold Godwinson of England, William of Normandy, and Harald Hardrada of Norway. Hardrada embodied the old Viking ideal, the belief that the world could still be taken by force. He invaded northern England with a vast fleet, but at Stamford Bridge his army was caught unprepared. Many Norse warriors were unarmored, resting after victory. The battle was brutal and decisive. Harald Hardrada was killed. With him died the last serious attempt to revive the Viking model of expansion. The world had changed. Kingdoms were stronger. Borders were firmer. Vikings did not vanish. They adapted. They became Europeans. Their violence became law. Their ships carried trade. The Viking Age did not end in fire. It ended in absorption. And what it leaves us with is not a judgment. It is a question. Did the modern world rise after the Vikings, or on top of what they destroyed? And to understand how this world truly changed, we have to slow down again. Because the Viking Age was not one story. It was many stories unfolding at the same time, in different directions, under different skies. We often imagine the Vikings as if they all moved together, as one people with one purpose. They did not. What connected them was not unity. It was momentum. Once movement proved profitable, it did not need coordination. It only needed imitation. Across Scandinavia, stories traveled faster than ships. Stories of silver taken from monasteries that had no walls. Stories of kings who paid tribute instead of fighting. Stories of men who returned home richer than any farmer could ever hope to be. And when those men walked back into their villages, They did not just bring wealth, they brought proof. Proof that the world beyond the horizon was vulnerable. So more ships were built. More crews assembled. More young men chose risk over inheritance. The sea filled with intention. We need to pause here, because this is where the Viking Age stopped being a series of raids and became a historical force. Raiding is temporary. It burns fast and fades. What followed was different. By the middle of the 9th century, Vikings no longer thought only in seasons. They thought in years. When they crossed the sea to Britain, many did not plan to return. They brought livestock. They brought families. They brought expectations. And this changed everything. In England, the kingdoms were already fragile. Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Wessex, divided, suspicious of one another, slow to unite. When the first major Viking armies arrived, resistance was uneven. Some fought, some paid, some collapsed without a battle.